The book of Genesis, the creation of the world, Genesis 1-2. The narrative of creation in Genesis is one of the best-known parts of the Bible. It describes how God created the world and everything in it in 6 days, resting on the seventh. On the first day God said, "Let there be light." And light appeared, separating it from the darkness. He called the light day and the darkness night. On the second day, God created the sky, separating the waters above and below, and called the firmament heaven. On the third day, he gathered the waters into one place, causing dry land to appear, which he called earth, and the waters he called seas. He also made vegetation sprout on the earth, plants that produce seeds and trees that bear fruit. On the fourth day, God created the luminaries, the sun to govern the day, the moon to govern the night, and the stars. On the fifth day, he created the living creatures of the seas and the birds of the skies, blessing them to multiply. On the sixth day, God created the animals of the land according to their species, and finally created man in his image and likeness. He created man and woman and gave them dominion over all creation, instructing them to be fruitful and multiply. On the seventh day, God rested, blessed, and sanctified the seventh day as a rest. The second narrative of creation in chapter 2 focuses more closely on the creation of man and woman. God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed into him the breath of life. He planted a garden in Eden, placing the man there to cultivate and keep it. God saw that it was not good for man to be alone, so he created a woman from the man's rib, and she became his companion. The creation of the world and humanity in Genesis is not just a description of events, but also establishes the special relationship between God and man, highlighting human responsibility in caring for creation and the importance of rest and sanctification of the seventh day. The narrative of the world's creation in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis is fundamental to understanding the relationship between God and creation, as well as the roles of man and woman in the universe. This story is divided into 2 complementary parts that offer a comprehensive view of the origin of everything. The first account of creation, Genesis 1:1-2-3. The first account of creation is structured in 7 days, each representing a stage of God's creative process. Day 1, the creation of light. God begins creation with a powerful command, "Let there be light." Light appears, and God separates it from darkness, calling it light day and darkness night. This fundamental act establishes the basis for order and life. Day 2, separation of the waters. God creates the sky to separate the waters above and below, forming the sky. This act creates a habitable space, dividing the waters and preparing the environment for life. Day 3, dry land and vegetation. God gathers the waters under the sky into one place, causing dry land to appear, which he calls earth and the seas. The earth then produces vegetation, plants that bear seeds and fruit trees. This day is significant because it marks the creation of food and habitat for the earth's future inhabitants. Day 4, luminaries. God creates great luminaries to separate the day from night and to serve as signs for seasons, days, and years. The sun governs the day, while the moon and stars govern the night. These celestial bodies not only illuminate the earth, but also regulate time. Day 5, life in the waters and skies. God fills the waters with marine creatures and the skies with birds. He blesses these creatures, instructing them to be fruitful and multiply. This act of blessing creation is a recurring theme that underscores God's goodness. Day 6, land animals and humanity. God creates land animals, each according to its kind. Then he creates man in his image and likeness, both male and female, giving them dominion over all creation. He instructs humanity to be fruitful, multiply, and govern the earth. This day culminates with the creation of humanity, which is the pinnacle of creation, highlighting the special dignity and responsibility of human beings. Day 7. Rest and Sanctification. God finishes his work and rests on the seventh day, blessing and sanctifying this day as a time of rest. This final act concludes the creative process and establishes the pattern of the Sabbath, a sacred time of rest and worship. The second account of creation is Genesis 2:4-25. The second account of creation complements the first by offering a more detailed focus on the creation of man and woman and their role in creation. Formation of man. God forms man from the dust of the earth and breathes into him the breath of life, making man a living soul. This intimate act of creation highlights God's closeness to humanity and the unique nature of human beings as bearers of the divine image. The Garden of Eden. God plants a garden in Eden and places man there to cultivate and keep it. The garden is described as a paradise with various trees, including the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Man is free to eat from all the trees except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, with the warning that eating from this tree would bring death. Creation of woman. God sees that it is not good for man to be alone and decides to make a suitable helper. He brings all the animals to man to name them, but they need to be found suitable as a companion. So God makes a man fall into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and forms a woman. When a man sees a woman, he recognizes her as a suitable companion, and they become one flesh. Central themes of creation: God's sovereignty. God is presented as the sovereign creator who brings order out of chaos and creates a harmonious and pleasing universe. Each act of creation is initiated by God's word, underscoring his absolute power and authority, the goodness of creation. Repeatedly, God sees that his creation is good. This emphasis on the goodness of creation reflects God's benevolent character and the perfection of his plan, the image of God in humanity. Creating man and woman in God's image is fundamental to understanding human dignity. This concept implies that humans have intrinsic value and a unique responsibility to reflect God's character on earth. Human responsibility. God gives man and woman dominion over creation and caring for it. This cultural mandate includes responsible stewardship and care for the earth and all its creatures, rest and worship. God's rest on the seventh day and the sanctification of this day establish a pattern for human life. The Sabbath is not just a time of physical rest, but also a time of worship and spiritual renewal, recognizing God's completed work. The narrative of creation in Genesis 1:2 provides a theological and ethical foundation for the biblical worldview. It underscores God's majesty, the goodness of creation, and humanity's dignity and responsibility. These themes are fundamental to understanding the relationship between God, man, and the universe. The fall of man, Genesis 3. The fall of man is a crucial event that explains the entry of sin and suffering into the world. Adam and Eve, the first human beings, lived in the Garden of Eden, a paradise where they had everything they needed and a direct relationship with God. God had given them the freedom to eat from all the trees in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, warning them that if they ate from it, they would surely die. However, the serpent, described as more cunning than all the wild animals, approached Eve and questioned God's command. The serpent suggested that by eating the forbidden fruit, they would not die but become like God, knowing good and evil. Seeing that the fruit was pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, Eve ate it and gave some to Adam, who was with her, and he ate it too. Immediately after eating the fruit, Adam and Eve, who were naked, felt ashamed, sewing fig leaves together to cover themselves. When God called them in the garden, they hid out of fear. God confronted Adam and Eve, and both admitted their disobedience, but also blamed the serpent and each other. As a consequence, God pronounced judgments. The serpent was cursed to crawl on its belly and have enmity with the woman's offspring. The woman was sentenced to multiplied pain in childbirth and a desire that her husband's leadership would oppose. The man was condemned to a life of hard work, as the ground was cursed because of him, producing thorns and thistles, and he would have to toil to get his food until he returned to the dust of the earth. Besides the specific curses, Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden to prevent them from eating from the tree of life and living forever in their sinful state. God placed cherubim and a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. The fall of man is fundamental to understanding the human condition of sin and the need for redemption, introducing the narrative of redemption that permeates the entire Bible. Cain and Abel, Genesis 4. After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was a farmer, while Abel was a shepherd. Both brought offerings to God. Cain brought fruits of the soil, and Abel brought the firstborn and fat portions of his flock. God looked favorably at Abel's offering, but rejected Cain's, which made Cain very angry and sad. God warned Cain about his feelings, saying that if he did what was right, he would be accepted. But if he did not, sin was crouching at his door, desiring to have him, but he must rule over it. Ignoring God's warning, Cain invited Abel to the field and killed him. God confronted Cain, asking where Abel was. Cain replied, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" God revealed that Abel's blood was crying out from the ground and cursed Cain, saying that the ground would no longer yield its crops for him and that he would be a restless wanderer. Cain lamented that his punishment was too great to bear and feared being killed by others. However, God placed a mark on Cain to protect him, ensuring that anyone who killed him would suffer vengeance 7 times over. Cain left the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. He had a son, Enoch, and built a city, naming it after his son. Cain's lineage continued, and the narrative mentions several descendants, including Lamech, who took 2 wives and is known for killing a man and boasting about it, indicating a downward spiral of violence and corruption. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve had another son, Seth, who was seen as a new beginning, a godly line that would eventually lead to the birth of Noah. The story of Cain and Abel illustrates the consequences of sin, the growing corruption of humanity, and God's continued mercy amid judgment. The flood, Genesis 6:9. As the population on earth increased, the wickedness of humanity grew to the point that God regretted creating humans. He decides to destroy humanity with a flood, but finds Noah, a righteous and blameless man, among his contemporaries. God instructed Noah to build an ark of cypress wood with specific dimensions to save his family and a pair of every animal species. Noah obeyed, and when the flood came, he, his family, and the animals entered the ark. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and all the mountains were covered by water. Everything with the breath of life outside the ark perished. The waters prevailed for 150 days until God remembered Noah and sent a wind over the earth, and the waters began to recede. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and the waters continued to recede until Noah sent out a raven, which kept flying back and forth, and a dove, which returned with a freshly plucked olive leaf, signaling that the waters had receded. After another 7 days, Noah sent the dove out again, and it did not return, indicating that the land was dry. Noah, his family, and the animals came out of the ark, and Noah built an altar to the Lord, offering burnt offerings to some of the clean animals. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and promised never to curse the ground again because of humans. Even though the inclination of the human heart has been evil since childhood, he established a covenant with Noah, promising never to destroy all life with a flood again, and set the rainbow as the sign of this covenant. Noah planted a vineyard, drank some of the wine, and became drunk. His son Ham saw his father's nakedness and told his brothers Shem and Japheth, who covered their father without looking at him. When Noah awoke and learned what Ham had done, he cursed Ham's son Canaan and blessed Shem and Japheth. Noah lived 950 years and then died. The story of the flood highlights God's justice in judging sin and his mercy in saving Noah and his family. It establishes the importance of obedience and faith in God and introduces the concept of divine covenants that will be repeated throughout the biblical narrative. The Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. The story of the Tower of Babel explains the origin of the world's diverse languages and shows humanity's tendency to seek self-sufficiency and pride, defying divine authority. After the flood, humanity began to multiply and spread over the earth. At one point, a group of people settled in the plain of Shinar and decided to build a city and a tower that reached the heavens, aiming to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered over the earth. They used bricks instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. However, their technological advancement and ability to cooperate reflected a desire for independence from God and self-sufficiency. God came down to see the city and the tower and recognized that as one people with one language, nothing they planned would be impossible for them. To frustrate their plans and scatter them over the earth, God confused their language so they could no longer understand each other. As a result, the people stopped building the city and were scattered over the face of the earth. The city became known as Babel because God confused the world's language. The Tower of Babel symbolizes human arrogance in defying divine order and the need for submission to God. It also explains humanity's linguistic and cultural diversity, setting the stage for the call of Abraham, which will begin to reverse the dispersion by creating a singular nation destined to bless all nations on earth. The story of Abraham, Genesis 12-25. Abraham, initially called Abram, is a central figure in the book of Genesis. God called Abraham from the Ur of the Chaldeans, commanding him to leave his homeland and go to the land he would show him. God promised to make Abraham into a great nation, bless him, make his name great, and make him a blessing to all the families of the earth. Abraham obeyed and, along with his wife Sarah, originally Sarai, and his nephew Lot, traveled to Canaan. There, God reaffirmed his promise, saying he would give that land to Abraham's descendants. Despite God's promises, Abraham faced several challenges that tested his faith. He had to deal with famine, Lot, and the issue of his lack of children. Sarah suggested that Abraham have a child with her maidservant Hagar to address the issue of heirs. Hagar bore Ishmael, but God made it clear that the heir of the promise would come through Sarah. When Abraham was 99 and Sarah was 90, God changed their names to Abraham and Sarah respectively and promised that Sarah would bear a son, Isaac. God also established circumcision as the sign of the covenant between him and Abraham. Shortly afterwards, 3 celestial visitors appeared to Abraham and confirmed the promise of Isaac's birth. Given her advanced age, Sarah laughed upon hearing this, but the Lord reiterated that nothing was impossible for him. At the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and Abraham circumcised him on the 8th day. Isaac's birth brought joy, but also conflict. Sarah demanded that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away, so that Isaac could be the sole heir. God reassured Abraham, telling him not to worry, for he would also make Ishmael a great nation. Hagar and Ishmael departed, and God cared for them in the wilderness. One of the most dramatic moments in Abraham's life was God's command to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah. Abraham obeyed, showing his total trust and obedience to God. At the last moment, an angel of the Lord stopped the sacrifice, providing a ram as a substitute. God reaffirmed his promises to Abraham due to his faithfulness. Abraham also had other children with Keturah after Sarah's death, but the main inheritance went to Isaac. Abraham lived to be 175 years old and was buried in the cave of Machpelah, which he had bought to bury Sarah. Abraham's life is a journey of faith and obedience, serving as a model of a relationship with God and a precursor to the promises of redemption. The story of Isaac and Rebekah, Genesis 24-26. Isaac, the son of the promise, had his journey of faith and challenges. Concerned about the continuation of the lineage, Abraham sent his eldest servant to find a wife for Isaac in his homeland. The servant, trusting in divine guidance, found Rebekah, a woman of great virtue and hospitality. Isaac and Rebekah's marriage was a blessing, and they had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. During his life, Isaac faced challenges similar to his father's, such as food scarcity during a famine. God appeared to Isaac and reaffirmed the promises made to Abraham, instructing him to stay in the land of Gerar, where God would bless and multiply his descendants. Like his father, Isaac also faced conflicts with local inhabitants over wells, but God always provided for him. Isaac and Rebekah also had to deal with the rivalry between their sons. Esau, the firstborn, was Isaac's favorite, while Jacob, the younger, was Rebekah's favorite. Esau, being a hunter, enjoyed outdoor life, while Jacob was more peaceful and stayed at home. Esau, famished after a day of hunting, sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentils, showing disdain for his inheritance. Near the end of his life, Isaac wanted to bless Esau, but Rebekah, remembering the prophecy that the older would serve the younger, helped Jacob deceive his blind father to receive the blessing meant for Esau. Esau was furious and planned to kill Jacob, who fled to his uncle Laban's house to escape his brother's wrath. Isaac lived 180 years old and was buried by his sons, Esau and Jacob. Isaac's story emphasizes the continuity of God's promises, the importance of faith and obedience, and the complexity of family relationships and the choices that shape destiny. The story of Jacob, Genesis 27-36. Jacob, also known as Israel, is a central figure in Genesis whose life was marked by conflicts, divine revelations, and transformation. After deceiving his father and receiving the blessing, Jacob fled to his uncle Laban's house. On the way, he had a dream in Bethel, where he saw a ladder reaching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending on it. God revealed himself to Jacob, reaffirming the promises made to Abraham and Isaac, and promising to be with him. Jacob worked for Laban for 20 years, during which he married Laban's daughters, Leah and Rachel. He loved Rachel more, but was deceived by Laban into marrying Leah first. Jacob had 12 sons and 1 daughter with his wives and maidservants, Zilpah and Bilhah. These sons would become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob prospered despite Laban's attempts to cheat him and eventually decided to return to his father's land. On the way, he had a transformative encounter with a mysterious man who many interpret as an angel or God himself. Jacob wrestled with him all night, and at dawn, the man blessed Jacob, changing his name to Israel, meaning he who struggles with God. Jacob's return to his homeland included a tense but successful reconciliation with his brother Esau. They met and embraced, showing that Esau's anger had subsided. Jacob then settled in Canaan, buying a piece of land in Shechem. However, Jacob's life continued to have its difficulties. Jacob's daughter Dinah was raped by Shechem, son of Hamor. Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, violently avenged her. killing all the men in Shechem and plundering the city. Jacob condemned his son's violence, fearing retaliation from neighboring peoples, but God protected Jacob and his family. God commanded Jacob to go to Bethel and build an altar. Jacob obeyed, and God reaffirmed the change of his name to Israel and reiterated the promises of a great nation and possession of the land. Jacob built an altar and purified his house, removing all foreign idols. On the way back, Rachel gave birth to her second son, Benjamin, but died in childbirth. Jacob buried her in Bethlehem and continued his journey. Finally, Jacob settled in Hebron, where his father, Isaac, still lived. Jacob's story illustrates the ongoing struggle between the old and the new, sin and redemption, and the fulfillment of divine promises despite human failures. With all his imperfections, Jacob became the patriarch of a nation destined to bless the world. The story of Joseph, Genesis 37-50. Joseph, one of Jacob's younger sons, is a central character whose experiences shaped the destiny of the nation of Israel. Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, born of his beloved wife Rachel. Jacob gave Joseph a richly ornamented robe, which provoked jealousy and hatred among his brothers. Additionally, Joseph had prophetic dreams in which his brothers and even his parents bowed down to him, increasing their animosity. His brothers conspired against him, initially planning to kill him, but ended up selling him as a slave to Ishmaelite traders who took him to Egypt. They deceived Jacob, making him believe that a wild animal had killed Joseph. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh. Despite being a slave, Joseph excelled due to God's blessing, and Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household. However, Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph. When he refused her advances, she falsely accused him of attempting to assault her, and Joseph was imprisoned. In prison, Joseph continued to demonstrate his integrity and administrative skills, gaining the trust of the warden and being put in charge of the other prisoners. While in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, accurately predicting their futures. Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams 2 years later that no one could interpret. The chief cupbearer remembered Joseph and suggested consulting him. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, predicting 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine, and advised Pharaoh to store food during the years of abundance. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him governor of Egypt, giving him the authority to implement his plan to prepare for the famine. During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph stored large quantities of grain. When the famine came, Egypt was prepared and became the center for distributing food to neighboring nations. The famine also affected the land of Canaan, where Jacob and his sons lived. Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain, and they met Joseph, although they did not recognize him. Joseph tested his brothers to see if they had changed, accusing them of being spies and demanding they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin. After several trips back and forth, Joseph finally revealed his identity to his brothers in an emotional moment, forgiving them and seeing God's hand in all the events that led to his suffering and exaltation. Joseph invited his entire family to move to Egypt, where Pharaoh offered them the land of Goshen to live. Jacob and his entire family went down to Egypt, totaling 70 people. Jacob was reunited with Joseph and lived another 17 years in Egypt before his death. Before dying, Jacob blessed his sons, giving prophecies about their futures and instructions to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers feared he would seek revenge, but Joseph reassured them, stating that the evil they did to him, God meant it for good to save many lives. Joseph lived to be 110 years old, saw the third generation of his descendants, and, before dying, made the Israelites swear to take his bones back to the promised land when God brought them out of Egypt. The story of Joseph is a powerful narrative of redemption, forgiveness, and divine providence. It shows how God can use even the most adverse circumstances to fulfill his purposes and bless many. Joseph is a model of faithfulness and integrity, demonstrating that trust in God can transform evil into good. The book of Genesis is a foundational account of the origins of humanity and the special relationship between God and his chosen people. From the world's creation to the story of Jacob's family, Genesis establishes the themes of creation, fall, redemption, and promise that permeate the Bible. It reveals God's nature as creator, judge, and redeemer, as well as the complexity of the human condition, which is marked by sin and the capacity for faith, repentance, and renewal. Each story in Genesis contributes to the grand narrative arc of the Bible, paving the way for the full revelation of God through Jesus Christ. We have reached the end of our video, and I hope you like it. If you're looking for inspiration, knowledge, and spiritual connection, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe to our channel now, leave your like and comment to strengthen our community. And if you want to help us continue sharing religious stories that touch hearts, become a channel member. Together we can make a difference and strengthen our spiritual journey. We're counting on you. We've left the link in the description of this video so you can become a member today. Continue watching videos about the history of the Bible. I will leave 2 recommendations here on the screen. God bless you. We will get to the next video.